May 17th, 1943. 25,000 feet above the gray waters of the North Sea, the sky trembles with the steady drone of Wright cyclone engines. 44 Boeing B-17Fs, olive-drab leviathans with shark-like noses, hold formation in a cold, unforgiving morning. Frost creeps along the inside of windshields. Oxygen masks hiss. The lead ship, Hell's Angel of the 303rd Bomb Group, cuts through the thin cirrus like a blunt spear. Inside her cockpit, Captain Robert K. Morgan leans forward, eyes flicking between the artificial horizon and the shimmering sun glare off his plexiglass canopy. The interphone crackles with static. Led to group level at Angels 2-5. Maintain tight box. Bremen ahead 40 miles. Below the German coast grows from a silver haze into a patchwork of canals, fields, and smokestacks. Bremen shipyards, steel, and the beating heart of U-boat production. A target worth dying for. The men of the Luftwaffe used to laugh at this flying barn. Langsam, schwerfällig, ein Ziel für die Jagdflieger. Slow, clumsy, a target for fighters. They had mocked the Americans' confidence that daylight precision bombing could cripple the Reich's war machine. That a lumbering fortress could defend itself against the fastest interceptors in Europe. But laughter fades fast when 50 caliber bullets start walking across your windscreen. At 0910 hours, German radar stations along the coast pick up the formation. Jagdgeschwader 26. The Abbeville boys scramble from airfields near Oldenburg. BF-109Gs and FWG-1190 claw into the pale sky contrails spiraling upward like white vines. In the ready hut, Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke slams his coffee down. Amerikanische Viermots. Bremen. He tightens his leather gloves. Let's show them what real flying looks like. Back in the formation, Sergeant Bill Leonard, waist gunner on patches, scans the horizon through fogged goggles. He doesn't see the fighters yet, just the endless blue and the rhythmic vibration of the fortress's engines through the deck. He hums a tune to steady his nerves. Don't sit under the apple tree. Then he spots them, black specks rising fast from the east. Bandits, 11 o'clock high. The radio bursts alive. Tail end, Charlie sees them coming in pairs. The Luftwaffe had learned from earlier raids. Head-on attacks now slicing through formation, where the bombers' defensive arcs overlapped least. Knoke's 109 hurtles in cannon shells flashing bright orange. The front of the formation erupts in smoke. A fortress named Lucky Lady takes a direct hit to her nose. Shards of glass and blood mist the cockpit. She veers out of formation, her number 2 engine coughing fire. Morgan grits his teeth. Hold formation. Gunners, keep them off us. Tracer lines crisscross the sky. The B-17's defensive fire weaves a glowing net, 12 Browning M2s per plane overlapping fields of fire from every angle. The air smells of cordite and burned hydraulic fluid. Shell casings rain from gun ports clattering down the fuselage. Top turret gunner, Staff Sergeant Tom Wilson, swings his twin 50s after a diving 190. Come on, gotcha! His burst rips through the German's fuselage. The fighter flips sideways, trailing black smoke, before vanishing into the haze below. Wilson pumps his fist once. No cheers, just breath fogging the glass fingers frozen stiff. At 0943, the bombers break over the Weser River. Flak bursts bloom around them like black flowers. Each detonation rocks the formation. The smell of ozone and burnt metal fills the cabins. Navigator Lieutenant Kramer yells over the interphone. Flak density increasing 2 minutes to IP. In the nose of Hell's Angel. Bombardier Lieutenant Vince Evans peers into his Norden bombsight. He adjusts the crosshairs, murmuring to himself, wind drift 5 right, steady, bomb doors open. The mechanical whir of hydraulic actuators drowns out the flak bursts. Morgan calls out, steady, steady on the run. Outside, Germany rises, below them shipyards glinting like steel scales, smokestacks stabbing upward. Then Evans presses the release. Bombs away. From each belly, clusters of 500-pounders tumble free, spinning downward through the thin air. The formation lightens, altitude rises imperceptibly as 20 tons of ordnance falls toward Bremen's industrial heart. Seconds stretch into eternity. Then the shockwave. Columns of smoke and dust bloom into the sky. Fireballs lick the horizon. Even from 25,000 feet, the crews feel it in their bones. But there's no time to watch. The Luftwaffe is back. Noakes 109s dive again, desperate to scatter the bombers before they reach the coast. One fortress explodes mid-air, a blinding flash and a falling wing spiraling into the clouds. Another loses an engine, limps out of formation. Its tail gunner keeps firing until the end, 50 cal tracers streaking into the void. Jesus Christ, mutters Leonard, watching the crippled ship vanish into the overcast. He glances at the ammo belt feeding his gun, half gone. Come on, girl, just get us home. The interphone crackles, all groups rally point Red Fox. Turn heading 270. They turn west. The North Sea sprawls below, gray and endless. The surviving fortresses tighten formation again, blackened and pockmarked, but unbroken. Smoke trails twist behind them like ribbons. In his 109, Noakes stares after them, fuel gauge trembling near empty. He's lost 3 men in 10 minutes. His squadron leader's voice comes over the radio, clipped, tense. Break off. Too high. Too many guns. Noakes banks hard dives through the clouds. His mind reels, these aren't the easy targets of last year. The sky once theirs feels suddenly hostile. Back at Thorpe Abbott's in England, ground crews line the runway as the fortresses return. One by one, they limp home, engines, coughing flaps, torn bullet holes patched by prayer. Hell's Angel lands last, right tire blown, smoke curling from her wing. When Morgan climbs down the ladder, his flight jacket stiff with sweat and oil, a mechanic asks softly, "How was Bremen, sir?" Morgan looks up at the sky, still rumbling with distant thunder. "Hell," he says, "but we gave it back." That night in Bremen, 200 civilians are dead. The shipyards burn for 2 days. In Berlin, Luftwaffe command studies the reports in silence. The Flying Fortress, once a joke among fighter pilots, has become something else entirely, a machine that bleeds but does not break. And in the dim light of the ready room, Oberleutnant Knoke writes in his diary, "They came in daylight. They did not turn away." Perhaps the war has changed. The following morning, Thorpe Abbott's airfield lay shrouded in mist. Mechanics moved like ghosts between the hulks of returning B-17s, patching aluminum skin with makeshift panels of dull silver. Frost rimed the wings. In the dispersal hut, the men of the 303rd Bomb Group huddled around mugs of lukewarm coffee, eyes red from lack of sleep. Lieutenant Colonel William Hatcher stood at the operations board, chalk in hand, sketching a new flight plan toward Kiel. The men groaned, another deep penetration raid, another run through a sky filled with cannon fire and flak bursts. "Gentlemen," Hatcher said, tapping the map, "High Command still believes in daylight precision. Our job is to prove them right." A young navigator muttered, "Or die trying." The doctrine had been born years earlier, far from the killing fields of Europe. In the early 1930s, at the Air Corps Tactical School in Maxwell Field, Alabama, men like Harold George Haywood Hansel and Lawrence Cuter dreamed of strategic air power. They believed in breaking an enemy's will, not by occupying his cities, but by dismantling his industry from the sky. Precision bombing, they called it, made possible by the secret Norden bombsight, a mechanical computer so sensitive that its inventor swore it could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. But dreams meet steel and flak. Over the past months, the theory had become a test of faith. Every mission proved the same truth: flying in daylight without escort was near suicide. In Berlin, General Adolf Galland read intercepted reports from the American 8th Air Force. His assessment was cold. The Yankees are brave, but they will run out of brave men. The Luftwaffe still dominated the skies. Squadrons like JG-26 and JG-2 Richthofen patrolled northern France and western Germany with veteran killers, men with hundreds of hours in combat. Their Bf-109Gs and FW-190As were faster, nimbler, deadlier in a dogfight. Against them, the Flying Fortress was a lumbering beast, 4 engines and a prayer. Yet the Americans persisted. Each new mission brought refinements. The combat box formation evolved a 3-dimensional lattice of overlapping arcs of 50 caliber fire, each bomber covering its neighbor's blind spots. The air became a geometry of death, 72 machine guns pointing outward from a single 9-ship squadron, a moving fortress city of thunder. Inside the turrets, men lived in bubbles of sweat and fear. Waist gunners hunched over their Brownings, wrapped in sheepskin eyes frozen on the horizon. Ball turret gunners, sealed beneath the belly in glass spheres, had to be cranked out manually if the hydraulics failed. "If we belly land," one joked grimly, "just tell my mom I went sightseeing." But laughter was thin armor. Losses climbed with each mission. Schweinfurt, Regensburg, Wilhelmshaven. The names began to bleed together, places that looked the same through the bomb sight, black dots blooming across gray cities. At High Wycombe, General Ira Eaker, commander of the 8th Air Force, faced mounting pressure from Washington and London alike. The British had switched to night bombing after 1940, embracing the shadow as protection. "You're sending boys to die for daylight ideals," Air Marshal Harris told him bluntly. Eaker disagreed. "If we give up daylight," he said, "we give up precision. We become no better than arsonists." He believed that striking the German war economy, ball bearings, aircraft factories, oil refineries, would shorten the war. It had to. Back in Bremen, Luftwaffe analysts pored over photographs of bomb damage. American formations were reaching deeper each month. Each raid forced them to divert precious fighters from the Eastern Front, where the Red Army pressed relentlessly westward. Every flak gun pointed skyward was one not firing at Soviet tanks. By late summer 1943, the raids grew bolder. The Americans hit the submarine pens at Lorient, the Focke-Wulf plant at Marienburg, the Messerschmitt works at Regensburg. Even Goering began to take notice. In one fiery conference at the Air Ministry, he slammed his fist on the table. "No one can fly over the Reich in daylight and live," he shouted. He was wrong, but only barely. August 17, 1943. 2 massive raids, Schweinfurt and Regensburg, nearly broke the 8th Air Force. 376 B-17s went out. 60 never came home. Hundreds of airmen killed, captured, or missing. Those who survived staggered from their planes like ghosts, uniforms torn, faces gray with fatigue. In the debriefing room, one pilot stared blankly at the map. "We dropped the bombs," he whispered. "But the price. Dear God, the price." Back in Germany, the factories smoldered. Ball-bearing production dropped by 30% in a single week. Yet even crippled, the Reich's industry refused to collapse. Slave labor replaced the dead. Machines were moved underground. The Americans had struck hard but not deep enough. Still, the psychological shift was immense. German civilians began to watch the skies with dread. The drone of engines became a warning siren of its own. The flying fortresses had become a presence, distant, inevitable, like thunder before the storm. For the Luftwaffe, the realization was bitter. They could still shoot down bombers, but they could no longer stop the raids. Every day the formations grew larger, the gaps smaller, the men more seasoned. Each returning crew passed hard-earned lessons to the next wave. They refined the craft of daylight destruction. In one captured letter, a German fighter pilot wrote home, "They keep coming. We tear them apart, and still they come. Perhaps they have more men than we have bullets." At Thorpe Abbotts, Captain Morgan walked the line of bombers before dawn. Their names were painted in white script on the noses: Memphis Belle Invasion 2 Sky Wolf. Beneath each name, rows of tiny bombs marked completed missions. 10, 15, 20. Few reached 25. Those who did went home legends in a war that seemed endless. As Morgan passed Hell's Angel, he ran his hand along the bullet holes patched with dull rivets. The aluminum skin was cool beneath his glove. Above the horizon, the sun was rising a pale red disk like blood in fog. The intercom on the operations shack crackled, briefing at 0600. Target Hamburg. Morgan looked up, jaw set. So it's Hamburg next. From across the field, someone muttered, flying into the lion's mouth again. He answered quietly. That's where the lion lives. July 24th. 1943. Northern Germany. The summer heat lies thick over the Elbe River, and the city of Hamburg hums under an uneasy quiet. It's Sunday afternoon. Church bells echo faintly between apartment blocks, and the smell of baked bread drifts from narrow streets. Few notice the silver dots glinting far to the west, not yet. At 1600 hours, the sirens begin to wail. The first waves are British Lancasters and Halifaxes, sweeping in from the North Sea under radar-jamming window. Strips of aluminum foil blind German defenses. Nightfall turns Hamburg into a silhouette of flame. By morning, entire districts are ash, and the next day the Americans come in daylight. The crews at Thorpe Abbotts had been briefed at dawn. Target Hamburg Industrial Zone. Mission disrupt shipyards and oil storage. Enemy opposition heavy. Captain Morgan's crew climbs into Hell's Angel again, their 23rd sortie. The engines roar to life, vibrating through the ground crew's boots. Give her hell, boys, someone shouts. Formation builds over the English coast, hundreds of B-17s, from the 1st and 4th bomb wings, assembling into great wheeling orbits, each ship sliding into its place like a cog in a vast machine. Oxygen masks on. Guns checked. Bomb bay doors sealed tight. The sea glints below like broken glass as they cross the Heligoland. Bite flak begins at 22,000 feet, black bursts like ink stains against the bright blue. Steady, steady, Morgan calls. Maintain box pattern. Inside the waist compartment, Sergeant Leonard can barely hear his own breathing over the roar. Sweat beads under his flight cap. He peers through his gun sight and sees the city ahead, half shrouded in smoke from the night's fires. Even from here, it looks alive with flame. Below, Hamburg burns. Entire neighborhoods glow orange, the heat columns rising so violently that the bombers buck in the turbulence. The air smells faintly of sulfur and burned oil even at altitude. Target sighted. Evans calls from the nose. Wind 205, speed steady, doors open. Morgan nods, voice calm. You're on, Vince. The bombardier locks onto the aiming point, a maze of refineries and fuel tanks near Wilhelmsburg. Through the Norden, the crosshairs drift across a sea of rooftops and flame tongues. Bombs away. The aircraft lurches upward as its payload falls free. A dozen others follow the sky, suddenly filled with black specks descending into the inferno. Seconds later, geysers of fire bloom below the secondary explosions from oil tanks ripping upward like volcanic breaths. Radio chatter bursts across channels, Eagle leader flak. Intense. Angel 2's hit, losing 2 engines, navigator down in the 99th. Morgan glances left, a fortress is spiraling downward, smoke trailing from her wing. Parachutes blossom behind her tiny white flowers against the gray. Then, through the smoke, fighters, WW190s slashing in from 12 o'clock high. Bandits inbound, Leonard yells, swinging his guns. Tracers streak past red and white like comets. The gunner in the top turret screams, taking hits, taking hits. Hell's Angel shudders, holes bloom along her fuselage. The ball turret jams mid-spin. The smell of hot oil fills the cabin. Hold her steady. Morgan barks. Evans check the damage. Evans climbs aft, smoke stinging his eyes. The ball turret gunner is shouting, "Stuck, hydraulics gone." He pounds the release handle with his fist. It doesn't budge. Then over the interphone, the calm voice of the navigator, target strike confirmed. Secondary fires spreading east. They've done it. The return leg is chaos. Flak follows them past the coast. Fighters harry the stragglers. But the box holds battered, smoking, still flying west. Over the North Sea, two crews bail out into the gray chop. Rescue boats scramble, but most vanish beneath the waves. At Thorpe Abbotts, the field control tower counts them home one by one. 40 missing, the rest limping, riddled with holes. When Morgan lands, his crew collapses in the debriefing hut, faces blackened with soot. A staff sergeant lays out the recon photos from earlier flights, and no one speaks. The city is unrecognizable, a cratered plain of smoke, flame, and ruin. That night, British incendiaries fall again. The heat from successive raids fuses asphalt into molten rivers. The firestorm feeds on itself, wind drawn inward at hurricane speed, oxygen sucked from basements where thousands shelter. In some streets, the temperature reaches 800 degrees Celsius. Windows melt. Cellars turn into ovens. A German firefighter later described it simply: the air was on fire. By July 30th, when the raids cease, 42,000 civilians are dead. Hamburg, the gateway to the world, is a furnace of rubble and twisted iron. At 8th Air Force Headquarters, the after-action report uses colder language. Objective achieved. Industrial capacity severely degraded. Morale impact significant. But among the crews, the victory feels hollow. In the mess hall that evening, Sergeant Leonard stares into his untouched meal. "We dropped hell on them," he murmurs. "Men, women, kids." Captain Morgan sets down his coffee, eyes hard. "It's war, Bill, and they started it." Outside, the night is quiet. No engines, no sirens, just the distant wind over the English countryside. Yet somewhere across the North Sea, the city of Hamburg still burns visible from 200 miles away, a red pulse in the dark. In Berlin, Albert Speer studies aerial reconnaissance photos, his voice low. "If they can do this to Hamburg, they can do it to us all." For the Luftwaffe, the alarm bells are deafening. Fighter Command scrambles to reevaluate tactics. Fuel reserves are draining fast. Pilots are dying faster than replacements can be trained. And in the West, American airmen prepare for what comes next: deeper strikes, deadlier skies, and a war of endurance that neither side yet fully understands. The Flying Fortress, once mocked as a clumsy joke, now haunts the heart of Germany itself. August 17, 1943. Dawn. Thorpe Abbotts Airfield glows in the first light, a mist of dew curling around the silent hulks of parked bombers. The ground trembles faintly as engines begin to turn one then another, a rising chorus of pistons and propellers. Men move with quiet urgency, strapping on parachutes, checking oxygen regulators, inspecting belts of 50 caliber rounds that hang like brass serpents from ammunition boxes. Captain Morgan buttons his fleece jacket, breathing through the metallic taste of the oxygen hose. The mission brief still echoes in his ears: primary target, ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt. Secondary, Regensburg Aircraft Works. No fighter escort beyond Aachen. He had seen the faces of the younger crews during briefing. Eyes wide, hands trembling as they unfolded maps that led deep into Germany's heart. Two targets separated by over 100 miles. One forced to hit each both without fighter cover once past the Belgian border. At 06:15, the first B-17s lumber down the runway, their heavy bodies straining skyward under the weight of bombs and fuel. Wheels up. Gear locked. The countryside below falls away into patchwork green. The formation builds over the channel, layers upon layers of bombers slotting into place, 376 fortresses in all. From a distance, they look like a slow-moving storm. Inside the lead ship, Major Curtis LeMay, grim-faced, cigar clenched in his teeth, studies his watch. "Regensburg first wave," he mutters. Schweinfurt follows 40 minutes later. Timing is everything. LeMay's reputation precedes him: cold, precise, relentless. The kind of man who can fly through hell and take notes on the temperature. Over the radio, the calm voice of the navigator cuts through static, crossing enemy coast. Angels 2-5. The Luftwaffe is waiting. Radar stations at Dielen and Kassel pick up the massive formation before it even reaches the Rhine. Controllers vector intercept groups from Jagdgeschwader 326 and 11 toward the inbound stream. More than 300 German fighters, Bf-109Gs, FW-190As, and even a handful of twin-engine Bf-110s, loaded with 21 Streinsfeld rockets, scramble into the pale sky. Oberst Walter Usau, commander of JG-3 Udet, watches from his cockpit as the contrails merge overhead. "So, they really are coming without escorts," he says almost in disbelief. Then into his radio, "All Staffel attack head-on. Make them break formation. The first assault hits like a hammer." At 0920, somewhere over Koblenz, the bombers encounter the main wave. FW-190s scream through the formation at closing speeds near 500 miles per hour, cannons blazing. Thundermug takes a shell through her nose. Her bombardier vanishes in a cloud of red mist. Another Liberty Bell loses 2 engines before spinning earthward. The radio fills with clipped voices and static. Tails gone on, 3-1 navigator down. Jesus. There's fire everywhere, hold formation, hold formation. Morgan grips the yoke tighter. Evans check left wing. "We hit minor leaks," Evans shouts back. "We're good." Outside, the sky is a kaleidoscope of metal smoke and fire. Fighters dart between the bombers like hornets weaving through walls of tracer fire. Ball turrets spin frantically, their gunners screaming coordinates. 2 o'clock high incoming. Got him, he's burning. Each minute feels like an hour. Yet the formation keeps moving. Discipline, cold, mechanical, drilled into them through months of loss. At 10:40, the Regensburg force peels south toward Bavaria. Morgan's group bound for Schweinfurt pushes east. The air grows thinner, colder. Frost clings to the oxygen masks. Then on the horizon, the dark sprawl of the city shimmering under a thin haze. Schweinfurt, the heart of Germany's ball-bearing industry. Without these tanks grind to a halt, aircraft seize in flight, trucks die on the road. The Americans intend to choke the Reich at its mechanical heart. Navigator's voice turning onto IP. Flak concentration ahead. God, it's thick. The bombardier peers into the Norden. Steady, steady. Bombs away. Rows of black specks tumble earthward. Moments later, the city erupts. The bearings plants at Kugelfischer and Vereinigte Kugellagerfabriken vanish under clouds of fire and dust. Precision paid for in blood. But the Luftwaffe isn't done. On the withdrawal leg, the bombers run headlong into new intercept waves. FW-190s slash through from above. 109s climb from below. Skywolf takes a hit in her wing root fuel streaming like silver ribbons. She slides out of formation, trailing smoke crew, bailing out one by one. "Bail out, boys, go." The intercom dies in static. Sergeant Leonard can't look away. He watches their parachutes blossom white dots drifting through black flak bursts. "God damn it," he mutters, firing again, brass shells clinking around his boots. By 1300 hours, the surviving bombers cross the coast, many running on fumes. One by one, they limp home, some with engines dead, some with holes big enough to crawl through. Of the 376 B-17s that took off, 60 are missing. 160 others are damaged beyond repair. 600 men are dead or captured. At Thorpe Abbott's, the runway is lined with ambulances. Mechanics cry silently as wrecks touch down tires, shredded wings, shredded worse. The medics pull half-conscious gunners from turrets, faces blackened with powder burns. When Morgan steps off his plane, his uniform smells of cordite and blood. "How bad?" he asks the ground officer. The reply is quiet. "We hit the targets, but it might have killed us doing it." News spreads quickly across airfields, across London, across the Reich. Goebbels' propaganda calls it the massacre of Schweinfurt. American papers call it the mission of no return. In Berlin, Goering reads the reports aloud, satisfaction flickering for the first time in months. "They will not try that again," he declares. "Not in daylight." And for a time, he's right. For nearly 2 months, deep penetration raids into Germany cease. The 8th Air Force bleeds and rebuilds, waiting for something new, something that can go the distance. Across the channel. In a quiet hangar at Debden, sleek new fighters sit under tarps, long-range machines with names whispered like a promise. Mustangs. October 1943. Debden Airfield, Essex. Dawn fog clings to the grass as mechanics in greasy coveralls work under floodlights. Beneath tarps and scaffolds stand the future, the North American P-51B Mustang. Sleek, narrow-winged, painted in dull olive with white invasion bands not yet added. Its engine, a Rolls-Royce Merlin 61 built under license by Packard, sits humming quietly, idling like a big cat's purr. Major Don Blakesley, commander of the 4th Fighter Group, stands beside it, with his arms folded, a cigarette smoldering between his fingers. "They say she can go to Berlin and back," he says. The crew chief grins. "Sir, she can do it twice if you let her." For months, the 8th Air Force had begged for something that could escort the Flying Fortresses beyond the limits of the P-47 Thunderbolt's range. Too many bombers had fallen to German fighters when their escorts turned back near the Rhine. Now finally, a machine existed that could fly high, fly long, and still fight toe-to-toe with anything the Luftwaffe could launch. Across the channel, in briefing rooms thick with cigarette smoke, Air Chief Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory studies the maps of Europe. "The daylight offensive can't resume until we can keep the bombers alive," he says. "If these Mustangs perform as promised, the tide may turn." At Thorpe Abbott's, crews wait anxiously. Their B-17s patched, repatched, tired stand ready, but morale is fragile. Too many empty bunks, too many empty mugs in the mess hall. Captain Robert Morgan now carries the hollow stare of a man who's counted too many parachutes drifting behind him. In November, the order comes, Operation Point Blank resumes. The targets factories at Bremen, Wilhelmshaven, and Münster. The escorts a mix of P-47s, P-38s, and the new P-51Bs from Debden and Leiston. November 26, 1943. Over the North Sea, a vast procession of B-17s thunders eastward, 600 strong, flying in stacked boxes that glint like sequins against the cold sun. Above and behind them, the new fighters appear, Mustangs with shark-nosed scoops, their contrails thin and high. Morgan watches them through his canopy. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmurs. "They actually made it this far." Radio chatter flickers through the static blue leader to Angel 1, "We've got you covered, boys." And then the Luftwaffe comes. Bf-109Gs from JG-11 and FW from JG-26 rise to meet the Americans near Bremen. For months, they've slaughtered unescorted bombers. They expect the same today. But when they roll in for the attack, sleek silver shapes dive from the sun. "Bandits 3 o'clock high," cries a fortress gunner. Then, wait, those are ours. Mustangs streak past, guns flashing. Two 109s explode within seconds, shredded by 50 cal bursts. The German formation scatters, startled by the sudden, deadly presence of escorts that refuse to turn back. In one Mustang, Captain James "Slick" Lambert banks sharply, chasing a 190 through the thin white contrails. "You boys like to play rough, huh?" he mutters, squeezing the trigger. The guns hammer, the enemy plane bursts into flame. "Splash one," Lambert says coolly. "And tell the boys in the forts we're staying all the way home." For the bomber crews, the difference is night and day. The Luftwaffe's head-on attacks falter. Gunners who once fought alone now watch dogfights unfolding around them, their own protectors carving through the sky. Inside Hell's Angel, Sergeant Leonard exhales shakily. "Never thought I'd live to see the day we had angels on our wings." The German pilots are furious. At JG-26 headquarters, Oberst Josef Pips Priller slams his gloves on the table. They have escorts, now escorts that don't leave. His operations officer nods grimly. "And they're faster than anything we've got." By early 1944, the 8th Air Force is reborn. Raids grow in size, reach, and confidence. Bombers strike deep Frankfurt, Brunswick, even Leipzig. Each week, more Mustangs arrive, ranging farther inland. In Berlin, Hermann Göring listens to reports of American fighters strafing airfields near Hanover, nearly 400 miles from England. He shakes his head in disbelief. No fighter in the world has that range, he insists. His adjutant replies quietly, "They do now, Herr Reichsmarschall." The Americans name their new doctrine fighter sweep. Instead of merely escorting bombers, Mustangs now hunt the hunters prowling ahead, engaging German interceptors before they can reach the formations. The hunter becomes the hunted. Losses shift dramatically. By spring 1944, German pilot casualties skyrocket. Many Aces men who had survived since the Battle of Britain are shot down over their own airfields. One of them, Oberleutnant Heinz Knock, who once mocked the flying barns over Bremen, writes in his diary, "They have found our weakness. They fly faster, higher, longer. We cannot fight on our terms anymore." At Thorpe Abbotts, a new rhythm takes hold. Briefings end with quiet confidence. Ground crews paint victory marks on Mustang noses. The bomber boys still bleed, but the skies no longer feel like a death sentence. Captain Morgan's 25th mission comes in May, Berlin. For the first time, the 8th Air Force flies straight into the heart of the Reich, with fighter cover all the way. As his formation levels over Germany's capital, he looks out across the sky, endless fortresses stretching from horizon to horizon, silver escorts swirling around them like hawks. He smiles faintly. Guess the joke's on them now. Below the Reichstag and rail yards lie beneath the crosshairs of the Norden site. "Bombs away," says the bombardier. Thousands of tons of explosives descend upon the city that once laughed at the Flying Fortress. And from that day forward, daylight belongs to the Americans. February 20th, 1944. The English countryside lies buried under frost, the hedgerows white as bone. On airfields from East Anglia to Lincolnshire, engines cough to life in the pre-dawn dark. Over 1,000 aircraft prepare to launch bombers and fighters, both in what planners call Operation Argument. The crews have a simpler name for it, Big Week. The goal: annihilate the Luftwaffe's ability to fight in the air. The method: destroy Germany's aircraft factories, fuel depots, and training centers, and draw every fighter the enemy has into the sky where the new American Mustangs wait. At Thorpe Abbotts, Captain Morgan listens to the briefing, the red pointer on the wall, tracing a path from England to Leipzig. Target: Messerschmitt production plant. Secondary ball bearing works. Enemy response expected to be severe. The operations officer adds almost casually, "Gentlemen, this is the moment we've been building toward. From here on, we take the air war to them everywhere." Morgan exchanges a look with his navigator. They both know what that means: total commitment, total exposure. By 0730, the fortresses are airborne contrails lacing the winter sky. The sun creeps up behind them like a dim ember. At 20,000 feet, frost forms on the inside of the windows, glittering like glass dust. Below, the North Sea stretches gray and endless. Beyond it lies a continent bristling with flak guns and radar towers, and a Luftwaffe that knows this might be the decisive battle. At an airfield near Braunschweig, Gruppenkommandeur Major Hans Philipp briefs his pilots. His voice is low, steady. "The Americans will strike everywhere at once. Today we defend the Reich or we lose it." He looks around the room, boys mostly. 17, 18, some barely able to grow a beard. The veterans are gone. At 1,000 hours, the radar screens light up. Countless blips marching east. The order goes out. Start, start, start. Engines roar to life. Bf-109Gs and FW-190As claw into the cold air contrails, curling upward like spider webs. Above Leipzig, the sky turns white with gunfire. Inside Hell's Angel, Sergeant Leonard braces as the first flak bursts rock the fuselage. Jesus, they knew we were coming. Shrapnel punches through the aluminum skin, spraying the radio operator with fragments. He wipes blood from his face and keeps working the transmitter. Then the fighters arrive, waves of them diving through the bomber stream like falcons. Morgan steadies the yoke. Keep formation. Gunners call them out. 11 o'clock high, 6 low coming head-on. The formation becomes a maelstrom. Mustangs dive through from above, intercepting the attackers mid-run. Over the radio, Blue 4 to Hell's Angel. You've got a bandit on your tail, break right. Morgan banks hard. Tracer lines whip past the canopy. A Mustang flashes overhead, riddling the German fighter until it bursts into flame. Inside the ball turret, Sergeant Shorty Hayes swings his guns and yells, "Nice shootin', whoever you are." But there's no time to celebrate. More Germans pour in, desperate, fearless many on their first combat flight. They attack straight into the wall of fire cannon shells thudding against the bomber's sides. Tail guns jammed. Someone screams. Manual feed. Evans crawls back through the narrow fuselage, grease freezing on his gloves, and yanks the ammo belt by hand. The Browning barks back to life, tracers flashing red. For every bomber that falls, another presses on. At 11:30, the lead group reaches the target area. The factories of Erla Maschinenwerke sprawl below, vast and gray. Bomb bay doors open, Morgan calls. Evans steadies the Norden, aligning crosshairs over the factory roofs. Steady. Steady. Bombs away. A second later, the entire sky behind them blooms with fire. The Messerschmitt works are gone, replaced by a wall of dust and smoke stretching for miles. They turn for home, but the air is chaos. Burning aircraft fall through the clouds like meteors. Parachutes bloom against the pale winter sky, German and American alike. The radio is alive with clipped voices, each one a fragment of a greater storm. By dusk, the surviving bombers limp back across the channel. Runways across England fill with the wounded planes and men both. Ambulances line the tarmac. Stretchers move through the cold wind. But the raids don't stop. For 6 days straight, the 8th and 15th Air Forces hammer every major aircraft plant in Germany. Regensburg, Schweinfurt again, Gotha, Augsburg, Stuttgart. The cost is staggering. Nearly 400 bombers lost, thousands of airmen dead or missing. Yet the Luftwaffe bleeds more. In those same 6 days, nearly 1/3 of Germany's fighter strength is destroyed. Hundreds of irreplaceable veteran pilots are gone. At a field hospital near Hanover, Major Philip sits on a cot, arm bandaged, staring at the ceiling. Outside, new pilots are being briefed for dawn missions. He whispers, "We're killing ourselves faster than they are killing us." In London, General Karl Spaatz studies reconnaissance photos showing gutted factories and smoking airfields. They'll feel this for months, he says. And when D-Day comes, they won't be there to stop it. At Thorpe Abbotts, Morgan walks the line of bombers again, hands in pockets. Half the dispersal stands empty, burned-out wrecks cleared away to make room for the next replacements. He stops at the nose of Hell's Angel and touches the painted script. They'd called her a fortress, and maybe she was. But even fortresses crumble stone by stone when the men inside are all that hold them up. He exhales slowly, watching his breath turn white in the cold air. Then he says softly, "They mocked us once. Now they run from us." Above him, the contrails of the next wave stretch eastward, silver scars against the winter sky. February 13th, 1945. Southeastern Germany. The war's end is near, though no one in the air yet believes it. The front lines grind westward, the Red Army at the Oder-Patton's tanks in the Saar. But in the skies, the killing has not slowed. It has evolved. At Thorpe Abbotts, the men no longer speak of survival in percentages. They just fly land and fly again. The veterans' eyes have gone flat, that glassy stare of men who've seen too much fire. Captain Robert Morgan is now a major. His hair is thinner, his voice raspier, his crew mostly replaced. The new kids call him Iron Major, though the name feels bitter. He's scheduled for leave back home after this run if he lives through it. The target, Dresden. Officially, the city is a transport hub, railway lines, industrial spurs feeding the Eastern Front. Unofficially, it is something else, a jewel of the old Saxon kingdom, a place of art and churches untouched until now. The Germans call it Elbe-Florence Florence on the Elbe. But war has little patience for beauty. At 22:30 hours on February 13th, the British come first. Lancaster bombers from No. 5 Group roar across the darkened sky, opening their bomb bays over a city blacked out too late. Incendiaries fall by the tens of thousands, magnesium and phosphorus, cascading through roofs, igniting wooden attics and theater halls. By dawn, the heart of Dresden is a furnace, and into that fire the Americans come. February 14th, 1945, Valentine's Day. The 1st and 3rd Air Divisions of the U.S. 8th Air Force climb through high clouds over East Anglia. More than 400 B-17s escorted by long-range P-51s. The mission order target marshalling yards Dresden. Morgan's bomber Hell's Angel II carries 12 500-pound general-purpose bombs. He says little in this briefing. The young crews around him chatter nervously. Most have never even heard of Dresden before. At 1100 hours, they cross the Rhine. The sky is clear, too clear. Sunlight floods the cockpits as they climb above 25,000 feet. Below them, the land is gray and snow-dusted. Inside the lead ship, the navigator reads out the coordinates, approaching IP. Visual on smoke columns target area lit by previous raids. Through the bombardier's window, Dresden is not a city anymore. It is a storm, a black-red vortex of flame spiraling upward 10,000 feet high. Streets still visible at the edges twist into rivers of fire. The Elbe River glows orange from reflection. The interphone crackles. God Almighty, whispers the co-pilot. It's burning from the inside out. Morgan forces his voice steady. Eyes on the target, Evans. Do your job. Roger that. Bomb bay doors open. The bombardier peers through the Norden, but the crosshairs swim in the heat shimmer. No distinct point. Whole cities afire. Then hit the rail yards. Somewhere beneath that hell, Morgan replies, bombs away. The plane lurches. A dozen black shapes tumble downward, swallowed instantly by the inferno below. The formation turns west. No flak, nothing left to shoot at them. Just the rising column of smoke and flame climbing higher and higher, a chimney of destruction reaching almost to their altitude. The heat buffets the bombers like turbulence from a thunderstorm. Sergeant Leonard, back in the waist compartment, stares down through the floor window. He cannot see streets anymore, only swirling flame, wind-driven embers, the outlines of collapsed roofs glowing white-hot. Christ, he mutters, there's nothing left down there. No one answers. Over the next 3 days, Dresden burns without pause. The firestorm consumes oxygen faster than wind can replace it. Civilians suffocate in shelters. Pavements melt. The Frauenkirche, the city's grandest church, collapses under the heat. From neutral Switzerland, radio operators pick up reports of a glow visible from 500 kilometers away. In Berlin, Goebbels seizes the tragedy for propaganda. American barbarians annihilate a cultural city. But even his words sound hollow. Everyone knows Germany started this war, and the fires over Hamburg, Cologne, and now Dresden are only its echoes. In London, the debate begins at once. Some call it necessary, a blow to German morale and troop logistics. Others call it excess. General Ira Eaker, now deputy commander of the Mediterranean Theater, reads the dispatch grimly. We have become the firestorm. Back at Thorpe Abbott's, the crews step from their planes in silence. The debriefing room smells of sweat and paper. Morgan sits apart from the others, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Hell of a target, says the intelligence officer, sliding a folder across the table. You did your part, Major. Morgan doesn't look at it. Yeah, he says softly. So did everyone in Dresden. That night, as he lies in his cot, the sound of engines from another departing group echoes faintly through the mist. He closes his eyes and sees orange light endless and rising. In the morning, he signs his papers for leave. The clerk stamps them, glances up, and says, "You've done your duty, sir, more than most." Morgan nods once. "Tell the boys to keep flying. War's not over till the sky's quiet." Outside, frost glitters on the tarmac. The Mustangs line the edge of the field, their fuselages catching the pale sun. Beyond them, a flight of fortresses climbs once again into the cold English air toward Berlin this time, or maybe Prague, or whatever is left. And across Europe, beneath their contrails, the Third Reich is burning itself out. April 1945. The skies over Europe no longer belong to Germany. The Luftwaffe, once feared disciplined, the cutting edge of blitzkrieg, is a shell. Oil reserves gone, airfields cratered, pilots dead or scattered. What remains are boys barely trained flying Me-109Gs with paint still drying on their fuselages. For the men of the 8th Air Force, the missions now feel different. No longer desperate, but relentless. The outcome is certain. The only question is how much longer the dying will last. At Thorpe Abbott's, the morning briefing is routine Berlin again. The 15th time this month. The target rail junctions feeding the collapsing capital. The resistance expected minimal. Major Robert Morgan sits quietly flipping through the mission map. He's flown over Germany so many times now that he knows its rivers by shape, its cities by scars. Minimal, he mutters. That's what they said over Schweinfurt, too. But this time it's different. The airmen are veterans now, disciplined, hardened, methodical. The formations form perfectly. The weather is clear. The Mustangs sweep ahead, almost bored. 900 hours. Crossing the Rhine. Below them, Germany lies in ruin, a wasteland of rubble and smoke stretching to the horizon. Rivers are black with oil slicks. Rail lines cut. Cities gutted. Even from 25,000 feet, you can see it, a nation reduced to ash. In one Mustang, Lieutenant James Lambert, the same pilot who'd saved Morgan's crew near Bremen 2 years earlier, tilts his canopy back, eyes narrowing. Berlin ahead, he radios. Smoke visible at 50 miles. The city appears like a bruise on the landscape, gray, cratered, smoldering. Soviet artillery is already pounding its eastern edges. At 10:10 hours, the bombers reach their initial point. Morgan levels Hell's Angel 2 over the target. Below the rail yards are a maze of twisted steel. Even now, German trains move desperate, overloaded, trying to ferry troops and refugees westward before the Red Army seals the ring. "Doors open," says Evans, his voice calm, detached. The bombs fall in silence. From above, they look like raindrops. Then thunder. A chain of explosions ripples across the city's south side, black plumes merging into the pall already hanging above Berlin. No fighters rise to meet them. No flak arcs upward. Only the dull rumble of distant guns, Russian guns, echoing through the haze. Inside the lead ship, a waist gunner named Tommy Harris looks down and whispers, "There's no one left to fight us." On the ground, Berlin is a nightmare. Civilians scavenge in cellars. Streets are clogged with rubble and burned-out trams. In the Tiergarten, anti-aircraft guns stand abandoned barrels, cold. Smoke drifts from the Reich chancellery like a dying breath. Deep underground, in a reinforced bunker, Adolf Hitler listens to the reports. "American bombers over Berlin again," one aide says quietly. The Führer doesn't answer. He stares at the map, pinned with useless flags, eyes hollow. The war he once believed would conquer the world now ends with the sky itself raining ruin upon his capital. Back in the air, Morgan circles once before turning west. His crew watches the city fade beneath them, a black sea of smoke and flickering fire. "So this is how it ends," Leonard says softly. "Not yet," Morgan replies. "But soon." They fly home in silence. The radio chatter, once filled with fear and adrenaline, is sparse now, just headings, altitudes, fuel checks. Even victory feels heavy. That night at the officers' club, a few men drink quietly under dim lights. A gramophone plays a slow jazz tune. No one talks about Dresden or Hamburg or Schweinfurt. They just sit listening to the rain outside. Morgan writes a letter he'll never send to the families of the men he's lost. We believed we could end this war from the air, he writes. Maybe we did. But every victory we won fell through fire. Meanwhile, across the Channel, the Allied command prepares for the final push. Operation Varsity. The crossing of the Rhine is complete. The Red Army is in the suburbs of Berlin, and overhead the last daylight raids continue. The targets are symbolic now, marshalling yards, remnants of factories, anything left standing. On April 25th, the 8th Air Force and the Red Air Force coordinate a joint strike. Americans from the West, Soviets from the East, on the city of Oranienburg. The Germans call it Der letzte Angriff, the last attack. In his bunker diary, a Luftwaffe officer records the moment: no order, no fuel, no hope. The sky belongs to them. 3 days later, Hitler is dead. 2 weeks later, the Reich surrenders. At Thorpe Abbot's, the news comes over the loudspeakers: Germany has capitulated. The war in Europe is over. There's no cheering at first, just silence. The kind that comes when you realize you've lived through what should have killed you. Morgan steps outside into the cool evening. The runways are quiet for the first time in years. No engines. No briefings. No formations climbing into the mist. He looks up at the stars. The same sky they fought for. The same sky that took so much. A mechanic walks past, salutes. Hell of a job, sir. Morgan nods. Hell of a price. Behind them, the hangars are dark. The fortresses, patched, bullet-riddled, proud, stand in neat rows under the moonlight, silent now, their guns cold. May 1945, England. The war in Europe is over, but Thorpe Abbot's doesn't celebrate the way outsiders imagine. There are no roaring parties, no champagne. Just a long exhale, a collective release after years of holding breath. The runways are quiet, the control tower windows dark, and the air smells of damp grass instead of burnt oil. Major Robert Morgan stands at the end of the tarmac, with his flight jacket draped over his shoulder. He's waiting for a truck to take him to the port. A Liberty ship will sail for New York. His orders say rotation to stateside duty. His hands say otherwise, they tremble slightly. Behind him, rows of B-17s sit idle tails marked with faded squadron letters. The ground crews have been reassigned or shipped home. Silence now defines the airfield that once thundered like a living thing. Captain James "Slick" Lambert, now a Mustang ace, walks up beside him. You leaving today? Morgan nods. If the weather holds. Lambert exhales the smoke curling in the morning chill. Hell of a thing, Major. We actually did it. Morgan doesn't smile. Yeah, he says quietly. But look what it took. They watch a pair of fortresses taxiing one last time, ceremonial flights for the photographers. Shoo shoo baby 909 heaven sent. The engines rumble to life, coughing blue smoke, then fade into the distance. Lambert flicks ash into the wind. You think they'll remember any of this in 20 years? Morgan shrugs. They'll remember the planes, maybe the missions, but not the noise, not the smell. They won't remember how cold it was at 25,000 feet, when you couldn't feel your hands and your buddy's blood froze on your sleeve. When Morgan boards the transport later that day, he looks back once more at the field. The hangars, the control tower, the ghosts. The crossing takes 9 days. The Atlantic is calm, but sleep doesn't come easily. Every time Morgan closes his eyes, he hears engines. He sees contrails and flashes of tracer fire, the horizon burning red. On May 18th, the Liberty ship docks in New York. The skyline rises from the morning mist, and the crowd on the pier erupts in cheers. Bands play Sentimental Journey. Banners flutter. It should feel like triumph. But as Morgan steps onto American soil, the noise feels distant, hollow. The ground sways under his feet, not from the ship, but from years of flight. Reporters swarm the returning crews. What was it like over Germany? One asks. Morgan hesitates, then answers softly. Loud. A woman presses a bouquet into his hands. Someone snaps a photo. The flash burns white. For a moment, he sees the flare of flak instead. Back home in Knoxville, Tennessee, he finds his mother waiting on the porch. She hugs him so tightly, he can't breathe. "You came home," she whispers. "I promised I would," he replies, though he knows many who didn't. He spends his first night in a real bed since 1942. No oxygen mask. No vibrating fuselage. Just silence. But the quiet feels wrong, too empty. He wakes twice before dawn, hand reaching for a non-existent control stick. Days turn to weeks. The town throws a parade. He smiles, waves, shakes hands. But inside he feels like an imposter, like a ghost walking through a world that moved on without him. At night, he dreams of the sky of formation, lights glowing in the dark, of the smell of burnt powder, of voices crackling over the interphone. He visits the families of his fallen crew, the Leonard family in Chicago, the Evanses in Kansas City. Each time the mothers ask the same thing. Did he suffer? Morgan always lies. No, he says. It was quick. But in truth, he remembers every scream. In Washington, the Air Forces prepare to transition into peacetime. The brass talk of jet engines, radar, and nuclear bombs. The age of the bomber, they say, is ending, replaced by speed, altitude, and atomic power. Yet the lessons of the Flying Fortress linger. Strategy journals call it the victory of endurance, proof that precision, persistence, and sacrifice can break even the mightiest industrial empire. But among the veterans, another phrase takes hold. We bombed them into peace. It sounds noble. It also sounds wrong. Autumn 1945. Morgan sits at a small diner off Route 11, coffee steaming beside him. A young man in uniform slides onto the stool next to him. "You fly fortresses, sir." Morgan nods once. The kid grins. Heard those things could take anything the Krauts threw at him. Morgan studies the rising steam from his cup. They could, he says. But the men inside couldn't. The kid's smile fades. Morgan leaves $1 on the counter and steps outside. The morning sun is warm. The sky is blue. No contrails. No thunder. Just peace. He looks up and whispers to no one. We held the sky. I hope that's enough. Years later, historians will debate the morality of strategic bombing. But the men who flew those missions remember something simpler. The sound of engines fading after landing, and the unbearable silence that followed. Because for them, victory didn't sound like applause. It sounded like quiet. Europe lies in ruins. The war that began with lightning has ended in smoke. Across Germany, the cities once mocked as invincible are now husks. Cologne, Dresden, Hamburg, Berlin, each a monument of rubble. Streets are lined with hollowed-out facades, walls without roofs, staircases that climb into open air. The people move silently among the wreckage, as if afraid to disturb the ghosts. Women in kerchiefs, children with hollow eyes, men too thin to lift the bricks that used to be their homes. In the ruins of Hamburg's shipyards, someone has painted words in white chalk, "Wir leben noch," we still live. The flying fortresses are gone from the skies, but their shadow remains. In London, the air staff compiles a report on the combined bomber offensive. 1.6 million tons of bombs dropped on Germany, nearly 600,000 civilians dead, 2 million more displaced. Industrial production crippled but not destroyed, the document reads. The enemy's will broken. The politicians call it a necessary cost. The pilots call it something they'll never forget. At a U.S. Army base in Bavaria, former Luftwaffe officers are gathered for questioning. Among them, Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke, once the proud interceptor who faced the first fortresses over Bremen, sits quietly, his right arm in a sling. The American officer asks him through a translator, "When did you realize the war was lost?" Knoke's answer is simple. The day the bombers came and we could not stop them. He pauses, looking out the window at the gray sky. At first we laughed at them. Big, slow targets. Then we learned they were stronger than we were brave. They flew through hell and they kept coming. That was when I knew Germany would fall. The interrogator nods. He's heard the same from dozens of prisoners. What none of the reports say is that by 1944, the Luftwaffe was dying in its cradle. The fuel was gone. The pilots, the new ones barely trained before being thrown into impossible odds. The factories bombed, the railways shredded. And over it all, the unbroken hum of American engines. In Washington, the U.S. Army Air Forces begin their transformation into the United States Air Force. The doctrine of strategic bombing becomes gospel. In newly founded academies, young officers study the campaigns over Europe, Schweinfurt, Regensburg, Big Week, as proof that air power can decide wars. The words Flying Fortress become legend, a symbol of endurance, courage, and industrial might. But in the quiet corners of veterans' hospitals, the stories sound different. Sergeant Bill Leonard, once waist gunner of Hell's Angel, lies in a ward in Chicago, lungs scarred from years of oxygen deprivation. A nurse asks what it was like up there above Germany. He looks at the ceiling for a long time before answering. Cold, loud, lonely. You prayed you'd make it to the next minute, then the next. And when you got home, you prayed for silence. The nurse says softly, "You saved the world." He smiles weakly. We burned a lot of it first. In Dresden, the survivors begin to rebuild. Women, the Trümmerfrauen, the rubble women, form human chains. They pass bricks from hand to hand, clearing streets buried under 10 feet of debris. Between the ruins of the old Baroque quarter, they plant gardens. Children play among shattered statues. Life insists on continuing. An American journalist visits and writes, "They rebuild not because they forgive, but because there is no other choice." He stands in the shadow of the Frauenkirche, its dome still collapsed, and notes that someone has placed flowers in the cracks of the stones. Back in the United States, a new kind of monument rises airplane boneyards in the desert. Hundreds of B-17s sit parked wingtip to wingtip under the Arizona sun. Their olive drab fading to pale gray. Engines removed, guns stripped. Their names, Memphis Belle 909 Hell's Angel, still faintly visible under the dust. Men with cutting torches move among them, slicing through aluminum skin. The war machines that once thundered across Europe die quietly under blue skies. A photographer captures the scene, rows of bombers stretching to the horizon like tombstones. The caption reads, "The fortresses rest." For many of their crews, it feels like betrayal. These planes were comrades, not tools. They carried men through fire and ice and home again. And now they are scrap. Major Robert Morgan visits one of these yards in 1947. He runs his hand along a sun-bleached fuselage. The metal is warm under his palm. "You deserved better," he says softly. Nearby, a little boy tugs his father's sleeve. "Daddy, did these airplanes win the war?" The father hesitates, then nods. "Yes, but they didn't do it alone." Morgan smiles faintly, overhearing. "That's the truth, kid," he murmurs. In Germany, a different kind of memory takes shape. In Hamburg, a stone plaque is placed at St. Nikolai's ruins, den Opfern des Krieges und der Gewaltherrschaft, to the victims of war and tyranny. No blame, no names, just remembrance. And in the years to come, Germans and Americans alike will meet again, not as enemies, but as witnesses. Former bomber crews stand beside former fighter pilots at memorials, their hands trembling as they shake. Noak, gray-haired and soft-spoken, meets Morgan at one such ceremony in 1963. The crowd watches as the two men, once hunter and hunted, exchange salutes. "It was never personal," Noak says quietly. Morgan nods. "It always was." They stand together in silence as a formation of jet fighters roars overhead, faster, higher, colder. For a brief moment, both men glance upward, their eyes reflecting the same memory, the old thunder of the flying fortress. The steady hum that once divided the world between sky and earth, life and death. By then, the war has been reduced to textbooks and footnotes. But among those who lived it, the sound never fades. The rhythm of engines, the chatter of radios, the hiss of oxygen masks the heartbeat of an age. An age when courage meant climbing into the sky and trusting aluminum and willpower to bring you home. Because the B-17 wasn't just a machine. It was an idea that men imperfect and afraid could rise above the storm and change history one formation at a time. 1950s. 10 years after the war's end, the world is no longer the same. Jet engines scream where piston propellers once roared. The new age of speed, swept wings, radar-guided missiles makes the old fortresses look prehistoric. Yet among veterans, among the new pilots training under blue American skies, the shadow of those great bombers still stretches long. At Randolph Field, Texas, a young cadet in polished boots stands before a classroom chalkboard marked Strategic Air Command Doctrine. The instructor, a colonel with gray at his temples, draws a familiar silhouette. 4 engines, broad wings, tail gun. "Gentlemen," he says, tapping the outline with his pointer, "before there was deterrence, before there was the atom, there was this. The Boeing B-17 taught us that air power isn't just a weapon, it's a statement." The cadet raises his hand. "Sir, they say the fortresses won the war." The colonel smiles faintly. They didn't win it alone, but they made sure the enemy could never fight it the same way again. Behind him, a slide projector flickers to life. Images of smoke-choked cities, endless contrails, and faces, young faces, staring out from gun turrets. In museums and air shows, the last surviving B-17s begin their second lives. Memphis Belle, Texas Raiders, Sentimental Journey. Names once written in oil and blood now gleam under bright paint restored by volunteers who were children when the war ended. They polish every rivet, rebuild every .50 caliber mount. Inside the cockpits, they leave the bullet holes untouched. "It's honest that way," one mechanic says. "History shouldn't be too shiny." When the engines finally turn over again, deep, rhythmic, unmistakable old men in the crowd begin to cry. The sound takes them back across decades in an instant, to the cold, to the fear, to the comrades who never came home. In the co-pilot's seat of a restored Hell's Angel replica, a gray-haired Robert Morgan sits once more, oxygen mask resting unused around his neck. The aircraft climbs slowly into the afternoon air. Below the crowd waves, above the clouds open like memory. He looks over the controls, almost expecting to hear Leonard's laughter from the waist compartment, Evans's calm voice over the interphone. But the radios are silent. Only the steady hum of the Cyclone engines remains the heartbeat of another lifetime. The pilot beside him asks, "How's she feel?" Major Morgan smiles faintly, like she always did, heavy on the stick, light on the soul. They fly a lazy circle over the field. When they land, Morgan stays seated for a moment, hand resting on the throttle. "Feels like coming home again," he murmurs. Across the Atlantic, Europe rebuilds. In Bremen, cranes rise from shipyards reborn. Hamburg becomes a city of glass towers. Dresden, phoenix-like, rebuilds its skyline stone by stone. The Frauenkirche, once a blackened skeleton, is restored in 2005, its dome shining over the Elbe again. At its base, a small plaque reads in German and English, "Forgiveness is the only flight worth taking." Tourists pass without pausing, but sometimes veterans do. Men with trembling hands holding faded photographs of cities they bombed but never forgot. One American visiting from Ohio stands at that plaque and whispers, "I was up there." The German beside him nods, "And I was down here." They say nothing else. They don't need to. Historians still argue about the ethics of it all, the doctrine of total war, the morality of burning cities to stop a tyrant. They calculate tonnage, production loss, civilian deaths. But the men who flew remember it differently. They remember the frost on the inside of their masks, the endless droning that filled their bones, the smell of cordite and coffee, the shudder of metal under flak bursts. They remember faces, not numbers. For every fortress that fell, 10 more rose. For every man lost, another took his place. That was the quiet arithmetic of victory, terrible, mechanical, necessary. By the 1960s, most of the surviving bombers are gone scrapped or sold. A few remain on static display, weathered, dignified, their wings streaked with rust. Children climb on their tires, unaware that those steel shells once carried entire worlds of courage inside them. Yet the sky remembers. Every pilot who's ever taken off into the rising sun knows that low, steady thrum that once echoed across continents. The fortresses taught humanity how to own the daylight and what it cost to hold it. In 1968, at a reunion of the 303rd Bomb Group veterans, gather in a hotel ballroom in Dayton, Ohio. Laughter fills the room, but so do tears. They've grown old, gray, stooped yet, when the projector flickers on and the first photograph appears, 9 fortresses flying over the Weser River, the years vanish. Morgan Lambert and the surviving crew of Hell's Angel 2 stand together for a group photo. Someone raises a toast. To those who flew and those who fell. Glasses clink softly. Silence follows. Later that night, as the music fades and the crowd thins, Morgan steps outside. The sky above is clear and star-strewn. He breathes in the cool air and tilts his head upward. He still hears them faint, distant somewhere beyond memory. The rhythmic hum of engines crossing the dark. Keep flying, he whispers. History will move on. New wars will come with new machines, each deadlier and faster than the last. But the flying fortress will endure. Not as a weapon, but as a symbol of endurance itself. A machine that proved courage could be built from rivets and resolve. A legend born from fire carried on the wings of men who refused to fall. The last living crews of the 8th Air Force are few now, white-haired men in wheelchairs, eyes still sharp beneath frail brows. When they gather at memorials surrounded by families who know them only as names in history books, the past feels impossibly close. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, sunlight spills across polished aluminum. A B-17G stands at the center of the hall. Children press their hands against the glass barrier. Parents read the plaques aloud, voices soft with awe. Flying Fortress, crew of 10, range 2,000 miles. Beside the display, an elderly veteran sits quietly. The tag on his lapel reads, Robert Morgan, Jr. His father's photograph rests in his trembling hands. Reporters ask the usual question. What did your father say about the war? He smiles faintly. He said the airplane was brave. The crowd laughs gently, unsure if it's a joke. But he continues, he meant the people who built it, who flew it, who never came home. He said courage has a sound, 4 engines in harmony. 8 decades after the first fortresses flew across the North Sea, the doctrine they forged still shapes the modern sky. Precision bombing has evolved into satellite guidance. Drones fly where men once died. Yet every mission briefing carries the ghost of those early formations. Historians call the B-17 a paradox, both savior and destroyer. It liberated Europe and leveled its cities. It proved that technology could magnify courage and horror in equal measure. But perhaps its truest legacy lies not in the tonnage dropped or the factories shattered, but in what it forced humanity to confront. Mercy must be remembered. It must. In Dresden, tourists stand beneath the restored dome of the Frauenkirche. The sandstone walls still show darker patches, original stones scarred by fire. Each one a reminder, a scar that speaks without words. A plaque nearby reads, "Built from the ruins, reconciled through remembrance." Every year, American and German veterans' families meet here laying wreaths side by side. No speeches, no uniforms, just silence. An old man, one of the last Luftwaffe survivors, turns to a young American airman visiting from Ramstein. When I was your age, he says, the sky was full of monsters. Now it is full of peace. Keep it that way. The airman salutes. The gesture is awkward but sincere. Back in the States, a restored B-17 takes off from a small airfield in Arizona. Sentimental Journey climbs slowly into the orange evening light. Inside, two modern pilots handle her controls, one ex-Air Force, one civilian volunteer. The engines rumble deep and steady. At 7,000 feet, they level off. Below them, highways trace through the sand like veins of light. Above, the first stars appear. The younger pilot leans back. She's heavy, he says, grinning. But she flies straight. The older man nods. She's flown through worse. For a while, they fly in silence. Then the older pilot speaks again. Every time I take her up, I think about the kids who didn't come back. I think about what they built and what they gave up to build it. The younger one nods. You ever think the sky remembers? The older man smiles. Oh, the sky never forgets. As darkness falls, the bomber passes over a small town. People look up as the sound reaches them, that unmistakable thunder, deep and slow, echoing from another century. Some wave instinctively. Others just stop and listen, their hearts tightening without knowing why. Because even after 80 years, the Flying Fortress speaks not in words, but in resonance, a vibration that hums in the bones. It reminds the world that freedom is never free and that peace was paid for in aluminum fire and faith. In archives and films and museums and memories, the story of the fortress endures a legend both tragic and triumphant. It began with laughter in 1938, when German pilots called it Clumsy. It ended with silence in 1945 when its shadow stretched over every city once called invincible. And in between, it became something larger than a machine, a bridge between courage and consequence. Proof that mankind could rise higher than fear, yet fall just as far from grace. Somewhere over the desert night, Sentimental Journey turns west, her four engines glowing faintly in the dark. The pilots bring her down in a slow, dignified descent. Wheels touch the runway with a gentle sigh. The engines wind down, that old beloved rumble fading into quiet. For a long moment, the world is still. Then, through the cooling metal, you can almost hear it, the echo of 10 voices calling across the interphone, clear as they were 80 years ago. Formation tight. Bombs away. We're coming home. The last words of a generation that conquered the sky, and in doing so, taught humanity to fear and honor it forever.